The title of this video: she was the weakest cadet. Now she teaches their generals. Once dismissed as the Academy's weakest recruit, Rose Virell endured humiliation, exile, and betrayal, but never surrendered. While others relied on brute strength, she sharpened her mind into a weapon. Rising in secret through brilliant tactics and quiet resolve, she ultimately outmaneuvers not only her peers but the very system that tried to break her. Now, as war erupts across the stars, the same generals who once scorned her gather to learn from the woman they underestimated. In a battlefield shaped by intellect over ego, Rose becomes the architect of victory, and the voice of a new era in command. Ask ChatGPT. The blast of the training siren sliced through the frigid air like a blade. Cadets in black and silver exosuits dashed into formation across the open field, boots pounding against the metal-lined earth of the Academy's outer yard. Among them, one figure struggled to keep pace, slighter than the others, slower, and visibly exhausted. Rose Virell. She stumbled, caught herself on trembling legs, and forced a breath through cracked lips. Her visor flickered, and a warning flashed: neural fatigue threshold exceeded. Still she ran. Her squad had already reached the simulation gates. She was, as always, the last. From the observation tower, Commander Holland narrowed his eyes at the lagging cadet. "That one again," he muttered. "Virell. She'll never make it past first year." Below, Rose barely heard the jeering. A nearby cadet, Jex, top of the class and thoroughly smug, snorted as she finally caught up. "Need a walker, Grandma?" She didn't respond. Words took energy she didn't have. The gate hissed open, and they were thrown into the gauntlet, a simulated war zone packed with collapsing ruins, enemy drones, and shifting objectives. Rose moved cautiously, trying to remember the terrain sequence from the last run. She clutched her stun blade too tightly, hands shaking not from fear but from exertion. Every movement hurt. Every breath was fire. She was falling behind again. An explosion to her left knocked her sideways. Not real, just a shock pulse, but it slammed her hard against a wall. Her suit's diagnostics dimmed. Jex's voice came through her comm. "Dead already, Virell?" Shocker. They didn't need her. They never had. 30 minutes later, the simulation ended. Jex's team had cleared the zone. Rose lay on the ground, helmet beside her, pale and drenched in sweat. They left her there. Later, in the medic bay, an old synth nurse replaced the fluid patch on her temple. "You're killing yourself, child," it said softly. "This place will grind you to dust." Rose didn't answer. She knew that already. Her record was abysmal. 0 successful simulations. 0 tactical victories. A physical score so low it bordered on the medically concerning. And still she remained. By some fluke or clerical grace, they hadn't dismissed her. Not yet. But everyone believed she would fail. Instructors ignored her. Cadets mocked her. Some were indifferent, some cruel, but all certain of one thing: Rose Virell was the weakest cadet in the Tantal 9 Command Academy. And perhaps they were right. Each night, she returned to her dorm, bottom-tier quarters with peeling walls and flickering lights. She studied alone, ate alone, trained alone. The barracks buzzed with laughter and camaraderie, none of it reaching her door. But she stayed. Not because she thought she could win. Not yet. Because she refused to vanish the way her father had. Colonel Darren Virell. A name spoken in hushed tones and bitter jokes. Once a decorated tactician, now disgraced, blamed for a botched planetary defense that cost 10,000 lives. They said he snapped under pressure. That he miscalculated. That the Virell bloodline was cursed with weakness. Rose had been 13 when the verdict came. She remembered the way the lights dimmed in their home. The medals removed from the wall. The silence that replaced her father's voice. She'd entered the academy to erase that stain. To outlive it. But after a year, all she had was bruises, humiliation, and failure. One night, near lights out, she wandered into the unused archives. No one came here anymore. Holographic war records were considered obsolete, replaced by neural bursts and sim-fed briefings. Dust hung in the air like smoke. She activated a terminal. What loaded wasn't a lesson plan. It was a raw command log from a skirmish decades ago. The Battle of Fennel Ridge. She watched it unfold, over and over. The lead commander had made a decision that no simulator ever would have recommended. On paper, it looked like suicide. But in execution, it turned the tide. She rewound. Studied the angle. The terrain. The emotion. It made sense. No AI would have predicted it, but the commander had read the people, not just the numbers. She wasn't sure why that fact hit her so hard, but it did. It was the first night in months she didn't cry herself to sleep. She began to return to the archive each evening, studying old wars, unconventional battles, rogue moves. She started mapping the patterns behind decisions, the pressure points that turned commanders into legends or failures. And she began to train differently. She didn't push her body to match the others. She rewired her endurance, fought with leverage instead of strength, practiced stillness. She built a mind that moved faster than her limbs. No one noticed. Not yet. Weeks later, during a tactics evaluation, the instructors threw a deadlock scenario at the class. A no-win situation, designed to test whether cadets would fold or flail. Most teams defaulted to standard maneuvers. Jex proposed a full assault and failed spectacularly. Rose submitted a strategy that broke protocol: surrender a flank, feed misinformation, and bait the AI into a trap. It worked. The system paused. The sim flickered. The instructor's brow furrowed. Who submitted this? Virell, she said quietly. A long pause. Then a dismissive nod. Clever. Borderline reckless. Don't repeat it. But he didn't delete her score. That night, she sat on her bunk, bruises still fresh from the last field drill. She stared at her hands, thin, scarred, shaking, and smiled for the first time. It wasn't over. She wasn't strong. Not yet. But strength wasn't just measured by how hard you hit. It was how long you refused to fall. And she was still standing. Ask ChatGPT. The Academy no longer paid much attention to Rose Virell, not out of malice, but because irrelevance was easier than failure. She was a quiet fixture in the background, just another soon-to-drop-out cadet haunting the edge of every formation. But beneath that stillness, something unnoticeable to the eye was shifting. Her body remained lean, slight, often sore, but her mind had become a blade. By day, she performed as expected, average in drills, unremarkable in simulations. She moved in shadows, never drawing attention. But at night, when the barracks went dark and silence returned to the halls, Rose began her real training. She ran laps in the cryo rooms, where temperature dropped low enough to sharpen her endurance without alerting biometric trackers. She replayed battle footage frame by frame, dissecting every choice, not just the moves but the hesitations, the fears behind them. She began coding her own war sims, chaotic, unpredictable, ruthless, and played them until her eyes burned. She failed hundreds. Then she began to win. Alone in an abandoned maintenance shaft, she taught herself how to fight, not with brute strength, but with leverage and misdirection. She learned to read balance, predict momentum, end a fight in one move. Her strikes weren't powerful, but they were precise. There was no audience, no applause, just quiet breath and repetition. Her transformation was glacial and invisible. She still came last in group runs, still stumbled in heavy drills. But every so often, something happened that couldn't be explained. In a combat sim, her unit's leader froze under pressure. Rose took command, not with authority, but with logic. She redirected their defense, exploited the terrain, and got the entire team out with minimal damage. Jex called it luck. But it happened again the following week. And again. One instructor, Colonel Virell, began to linger longer during her evaluations. He said little, just scribbled notes and left. Then one afternoon, without warning, she received a transfer order, Tactical Adjunct Training, Level Red. The others stared as she packed. Jex's grin faltered for the first time. The new training wing was quieter, older, lined with remnants of a past generation. Fewer cadets, more theory, less glory. Colonel Virell introduced himself properly in their first session. His face was carved by age and war, eyes sharp behind thin lenses. "You see things others don't," he said without preamble. "That doesn't make you better. It makes you dangerous. If you want to survive, you'll learn how to make that danger useful." She didn't smile. She only nodded. He tested her relentlessly, not with beatings or brute force tasks, but with contradictions. What if your own plan turns against you? What if the right answer gets people killed? Sometimes she cried, but never in front of him. Months passed. Her classmates rarely saw her. Rumors spread that she had quit, that she'd been reassigned to data work. Until the joint sim. 24 cadets were chosen to lead simulated battalions in a multi-phase conflict. Jex, as usual, dominated the initial rounds. But on the final day, the sim shifted to unpredictable conditions: failing comms, AI corruption, terrain collapse. Chaos. Jex floundered. Others fell apart. Rose adapted. She isolated corrupted units, rerouted signal channels, and used the environmental hazards as weapons. Her virtual force won with minimal casualties. When the simulation ended, no one spoke. Jex stormed out. Colonel Virell approached slowly. "That wasn't protocol." "No," she replied. "It was war." He offered a rare smile. "They won't ignore you much longer." They didn't. Invitations arrived, closed-room tactical forums, off-record exercises, even live briefings attended by junior officers. Some thought she was being groomed for espionage. Others assumed she was a test project. The truth was simpler. She was useful. But usefulness has a price. Weeks later, a report surfaced: accusations of data theft, simulation tampering, manipulation. Her records were flagged. She was summoned without warning and stripped of all commendations pending review. The tribunal didn't need evidence. Her rise had been too fast, too quiet. Suspicion was enough. As punishment, they reassigned her to an outpost under siege. She was to serve as a junior advisor. No command, no weapons, just observation. She boarded the shuttle without protest. The outpost was worse than expected. Barely shielded, morale in ruins, leadership fractured. The enemy, a rogue mechanized faction, launched assaults in waves with devastating precision. And the local command had no strategy. Rose requested permission to run simulations. Denied. She rerouted internal comms to feed her reports anyway. When the base's lead officer fell in battle, she filled the vacuum, not through orders, but through clarity. She predicted the next attack window with brutal accuracy. Organized the remaining drones into a mobile flank. Set explosive traps in terrain no one else had considered relevant. Within 3 days, the siege ended. She didn't wait for extraction. She returned to the academy alone, bruised, covered in dirt, and carrying a datapad with every maneuver logged. The tribunal was gone. Her file had been cleared. They didn't give her an apology. But they gave her access. To war rooms. To doctrines. To generals. And most importantly, to silence. She walked the halls differently now. Still quiet. Still unassuming. But when she passed, cadets stepped aside. Jex no longer met her eyes. Rose Virell, once the weakest cadet, had become something else. Not feared. Not loved. But undeniably seen. And for the first time, those in power began to ask, not what she had to prove, but what she had planned next. Ask ChatGPT. ChatGPT said. The command chamber was colder than Rose remembered. Circular, steel-clad, pulsing softly with the glow of tactical hologrids and war-table projections, it had once felt like a world far above her reach. Now she stood at its center, surrounded not by cadets, but generals. She was no longer a student. Officially, she had been promoted to strategic advisor under high command, though the title drew as much skepticism as it did curiosity. She was still young, too young, some whispered, and she had no rank to her name, no medals, no battlefield commendations. Only results. Results that made her unavoidable. Around her, the room brimmed with silence as the simulation began. Multiple planetary theaters flickered into existence, each representing a real-world skirmish against the Dominion insurgents along the Athean border. The generals watched from the periphery, arms folded, expressions unreadable. Rose didn't hesitate. With a flick of her fingers, she rerouted battalions, disabled drone protocols, and collapsed 2 forward positions. Murmurs broke out behind her. "That's a retreat," one general snapped. "No," Rose replied, her voice calm. "It's bait." They'll take the opening and overextend. We let them. Then we collapse the corridor. She stepped back. The simulation executed. Exactly as she predicted, the enemy surged into the vacated territory. The trap closed. The AI Command Core registered a 78% efficiency rating and minimal casualties. A pause. No applause. Just the uncomfortable recognition that she'd outmaneuvered their old models. Afterward, as the room emptied, General Tarkon lingered. His posture was rigid, carved from decades of service. He studied her like a weapon he hadn't decided to use yet. "You don't fight like a soldier," he said. "I'm not a soldier," Rose answered. "I fight like the war doesn't care who's braver." Tarkon didn't respond. But he nodded once, and that was enough. Word spread quickly. She began to receive invitations, not just to observe, but to instruct. Her sessions were labeled Tactical Innovation Briefings, though many officers privately referred to them as indulgent experiments. Still they came. Even the most stubborn generals sat at her lectures, arms crossed, waiting for her to fail. She never did. One morning, she dissected the infamous Derelith collapse, an operation where 3 divisions were wiped out during a rescue attempt. She isolated the command flaw in the original plan within minutes, rewrote the entire approach in less than an hour, and demonstrated on a live model how a coordinated misinformation loop would have inverted the outcome. General Myron, who had commanded that very mission, sat in the front row. He said nothing, only left before the debrief ended. Her work wasn't flawless, but it was undeniable. And that made her dangerous again. Not everyone welcomed her presence. A core of traditionalists began lobbying to limit her reach. They accused her of doctrine erosion, of undermining command confidence. She was too young, too unconventional. She had never fired a weapon in live combat. She had never bled for her flag. Rose ignored them. She wasn't here to be liked. In private, she continued to test theories, ones the Academy had never allowed. She used off-grid sim nodes, old war code, and AIs banned for unpredictability. She explored psychological warfare, societal pressure points, and conflict modeling that accounted for morality, something most strategists dismissed as inefficiency. She wasn't trying to win battles. She was trying to prevent them before they ignited. The others couldn't see it yet. But she could. And when her visions worked, when lives were saved before the first shot was fired, her enemies went quiet. But one day, the silence broke. Colonel Virell called her to the edge of the bastion, a floating station above the contested Arcus belt. He looked wearier than before, his silver hair thinner, eyes sunk deep behind his glasses. "They're watching you," he said. "Not because you're wrong. Because you're replacing them faster than they can understand it." Rose didn't flinch. "Then let them watch." He gave a tired laugh. "You remind me of your father." She looked at him sharply. "I'm not him." "No," Virell said. "But you're walking a similar line." He saw too far ahead. No one caught up in time. A beat of silence. The stars outside shimmered like frozen sparks. That evening, she received an encrypted message, a simulation set far beyond anything she'd handled before. Not a tactical drill, but a projection, an unfolding planetary invasion by Dominion Prime. One that had already begun in secret. The data was real. The implications catastrophic. The generals hadn't acted yet. They were paralyzed by uncertainty, too divided to agree. Rose studied the scenario. Every variable, every unit, every possible outcome. There was no perfect solution. No elegant trap. Only choices that cut one artery to save another. She submitted a counter-operation under her authorization. It wasn't approved. She launched it anyway. 3 AI fleets were rerouted. An orbital disruption pattern was triggered. Rose sent encoded false orders that convinced the Dominion Vanguard the system was already compromised. In confusion, they stalled, just long enough for real reinforcements to arrive. No lives lost. No cities razed. No war declared. When the truth emerged, the chamber erupted. Half the council wanted her court-martialed. The other half promoted her again. And through it all, Rose said nothing. She wasn't a hero. She was a tactician. And war had finally started listening. ChatGPT said. The command deck was quiet, save for the distant hum of orbital engines and the faint pulse of warning lights. Rose stood alone before the central war table, hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on the constellation of red flares blooming across the Lydrian expanse. This was no simulation. The enemy had arrived, not with declarations or demands, but with precision strikes on communications hubs and supply routes. Dominion Prime was not testing defenses. It was dismantling them. Behind her, the room filled slowly with figures clad in command black and council white. Generals, admirals, sector lords, men and women with decades of service etched into their faces. Many of them had once laughed at her name. Now they waited for her to speak. She didn't look at them. The enemy operates with a decentralized command structure, she said calmly, gesturing to the shifting markers. That's not incompetence, it's intent. They've adapted to our doctrine. If we respond with centralized fleets, we'll lose every engagement within 40 hours. General Tarkon frowned. So what's your alternative? Scatter our forces across 6 sectors. No, Rose replied. We scatter our command logic. We give control to adaptive cells, each operating semi-autonomously but drawing from a shared neural core, mine. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. You're proposing we give you command of the entire fleet matrix? Asked Myron, incredulous. Not command, she said. I'm proposing you give me access. The system makes the decisions. I design its thinking. A long silence followed. Then Virell, pale and grim, spoke from the rear. We either fight a war we've already lost or fight a new one with someone who's never lost. That ended the debate. Hours later, Rose stood in the heart of the Nexus control core. Screens wrapped around her in concentric circles, flickering with unit reports, AI predictions, and shifting probabilities. Her pulse was steady. Her thoughts, ruthless. The Rose Doctrine was live. She did not issue orders in barked commands. She uploaded decision branches to the war neural net, defined engagement parameters, seeded unpredictability. Battles unfolded across 3 systems: chaotic, fluid, elegant. Her strategy adapted in real time, bleeding the enemy's momentum and baiting them into their own algorithms. Across the stars, enemy formations broke. Not all at once, but steadily. Like a symphony of falling dominoes, perfectly timed. On the 3rd day, the Dominion halted their advance. On the 5th, they retreated. By the 7th, silence returned to the expanse. She had won the war without a flagship, without a title, without firing a weapon. The aftermath was strange. Praises from people who once denied her existence. Articles, speeches, encrypted offers from worlds she'd never visited. She accepted none of it. What mattered wasn't the recognition. It was that the dying had stopped. Still, protocol demanded one final debriefing. The Grand Hall was lined with marble and digital archives, a space reserved for historic briefings and war doctrine reform. Rose entered alone, the youngest figure in the room. Dozens of generals stood in full regalia, seated in tiers like judges. She didn't offer greetings. She activated the tactical feed. I'm not here to celebrate, she said. I'm here to show you why you failed. The room stiffened. She walked them through every point of error: the blind reliance on outdated predictive models, the resistance to decentralization, the myth of invincibility. She dismantled their sacred doctrines in less than 20 minutes. Some looked away. Others looked furious. But they listened. You trained me to follow your system, Rose said finally. When I couldn't, you cast me out. That rejection taught me how to survive. That survival taught me how to win. Then she walked out. No applause followed. But no one stopped her, either. That night, Rose sat alone in her quarters aboard the Bastion's highest deck. The stars sprawled beyond the glass like scattered thoughts, silent, ancient, indifferent. In her hand, she held the cracked insignia from her first cadet suit. The one they'd said she'd never earned the right to wear. She closed her fingers around it, not in triumph, but in remembrance. They had tried to break her. But all they had done was teach her how to reshape the battlefield. And now, the people who once mocked her lined up to learn. She was no longer the weakest cadet. She was their teacher.